The room had been sealed for decades, yet its silence still felt fresh, as if the air remembered the last moment anyone stood here. In the first 100 breaths, nothing moved except a loose curtain shaped by the faint winter draft. Dust hung like weightless ash. A faint mark on the wooden floor caught the dim light through a cracked window. It was the kind of scene that made time feel stalled, as though the past refused to release its final truth. The investigator stepped inside, and the forgotten case awakened again, quietly, unwillingly. The year was 1998 when the report was first filed. The victim, Aria Lyndell, 27, a research assistant with a calm reputation and a gentle presence, had been found lifeless inside this small rental cabin near the southern Utah ridge. Her workplace had described her as meticulous, always early, always quiet. The community around her had spoken of her with a soft mixture of appreciation and distance. She was known, but not deeply understood. The case had seemed straightforward at first glance, yet nothing had aligned cleanly. No forced entry, no clear struggle, no definite timeline. The cabin itself had become an archive of doubts. The wooden beams had absorbed years of stillness. The tiled counter remained in the position officers had left it. The single lamp leaned the same way it leaned in the photos from the original file. Aria had chosen this place for a short retreat after finishing a complex research assignment. She had intended to take a brief pause from her routine, gather her thoughts, and return to her regular schedule. But she never returned. The original investigator, now older and quiet in manner, entered years later with the subdued caution of someone revisiting a place he felt he had misread. His name was Elias Ward, and he carried himself with the solemn patience of a person willing to face a long-standing failure. He removed his gloves slowly, inspected the edges of the table, and let his gaze move across the untouched corners. In his memory, the first investigation had been hurried, not careless, but pressured by unclear leads and limited resources. This time, the silence felt different, almost guiding. Aria's belongings were still stored in a sealed evidence box, a notebook filled with handwritten data, a torn page from a magazine, 2 undeveloped camera rolls, and a small, worn pendant engraved with a tiny geometric symbol. These objects had been logged, examined, then placed aside when no decisive result came. But now, with advances in analytical tools and new protocols, Ward felt the weight of possibility in each item. He paused at the window. Outside, the desert plain stretched into a wide horizon, pale and undisturbed. Back in 1998, a passing hiker had first reported the cabin. No forced locks, no visible chaos, just an unnatural stillness that raised concern. Officers responded and Aria was found. The autopsy at the time had been inconclusive, unable to determine a specific cause. With limited technology, no solid conclusion could be drawn. Ward remembered the expressions of Aria's family, strained, patient, yet hoping for clarity that never came. Over the years, he had carried the memory of their unanswered questions. It lingered whenever he encountered an unsolved case. And although he moved through various assignments, the thought of this silent cabin continued to surface in quiet hours. Today, he stepped deeper inside, his footsteps heavy on the old wooden floor. The scent of dust fused with a faint metallic edge carried by winter air. His eyes traced the wall where a small photo frame once hung, later found among Aria's things. The frame had contained a picture of her standing near a university building, holding a notebook close to her chest, her gaze slightly turned away from the camera. The photo had never been explained, nor the person who had taken it. Ward's notebook filled slowly as he redocumented the scene, not trusting the old record alone. A thin beam of sunlight revealed a faint discoloration on the floor, one that had been noted previously but dismissed as unrelated. Now, with a calmer eye and better tools, he marked it carefully. Every overlooked detail could matter. The atmosphere inside the cabin grew colder as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Ward listened to the quiet, soft, broken only by the distant sweep of wind against the outer wall. He unfolded the old report and read through the first entries, sensing gaps and uncertainties like missing pieces of a long-lost puzzle. His breathing slowed. His eyes moved from line to line. A phrase in the report caught him. Possible dispute reported by neighbor, unverified. He underlined it. No strong follow-up had been conducted at the time, partly because the neighbor's statement had been vague, uncertain, almost hesitant. But now, even small inconsistencies felt important. He spoke a few words under his breath, not fully formed sentences, just fragmented thoughts. Missed something here somewhere. Timeline off slightly. Her notes, something in them. His voice blended into the air, nearly erased by the quiet. Ward placed Aria's old notebook on the table. Its pages had been protected, but time had curled the edges. Inside were diagrams, dates, and a recurring symbol similar to the one engraved on her pendant. She had been working on a research topic linked to environmental mapping, collecting structural data from various ridge formations. Nothing in the notebook suggested conflict, yet its precision hinted at a deeper focus. He flipped through carefully until a loose scrap slid out, a small paper, torn unevenly, containing coordinates. These had been logged back then but not thoroughly checked. He held the paper to the light, studying the numbers. Something about them felt familiar, almost aligning with a faint memory of a site mentioned in a separate report years ago. Ward set the paper down gently, almost reverently, as if handling a fragile trace of Aria's final days. As he stepped back toward the door, he took one long look at the room. To him, it still felt suspended in time, waiting for someone willing to see what had been ignored. The air carried a quiet reminder. Something here had gone unnoticed. And this time, he intended to find it. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. 1,000 words. The case officially reopened when a storage facility audit uncovered a small envelope misplaced among unrelated documents. It was dated July 1998, 2 months after Aria's passing, and marked with a simple label. Still frame, cabin roll B. Inside was a single film negative never processed. How it had remained hidden was unclear, but its rediscovery formed the new axis around which the investigation would turn. Ward received the call early morning. The technician spoke quietly, in short, careful sentences. Found something, looks important, belongs to your old case. Ward replied with a low, steady, "Hold it, I'm coming." At the lab, he studied the negative through the illuminated screen. The faint outline of the cabin interior appeared first, then a blurred shape near the open doorway. The details were minimal, but the perspective indicated it had been taken from inside, possibly by Aria herself. The shape seemed like a person's silhouette, indistinct yet undeniably present. This single frame altered everything. Ward rewound his thoughts. If Aria had taken this photo shortly before her final moments, the identity of the figure could be central to the timeline. He requested a high-resolution scan and enhanced contrast, but even then, the figure remained unclear. Still, the mere presence of someone unaccounted for introduced a new direction. The lab technician cleared his throat. "Looks like someone standing just outside," he murmured. Ward nodded. "Someone not in the original report." He carried the scan back to his office, placed it on the desk beside Aria's notebook, and began mapping correlations. The unprocessed roll, the coordinates she wrote down, the pendant symbol, the faint floor mark, Each item felt like a quiet voice calling for recognition. The reopening of the case triggered new interviews. Officers contacted individuals who had interacted with Aria weeks before the event. Colleagues, neighbors, a store clerk who remembered her purchasing supplies, and the friend she had called briefly before traveling to the cabin. Their accounts varied, yet no one recalled her mentioning anyone meeting her there. One statement stood out. A former coworker, hesitant and unsure, mentioned that Aria had recently received an unexpected message about her research findings. Something about data misalignment. Something about internal conflict within the department. Nothing overt, but enough to make her withdrawn. Ward approached this lead with caution. He obtained archived internal emails, reviewed communications, and noticed a pattern. Aria had frequently exchanged messages with a colleague named Jonas Hale, who had later relocated out of state. At the time, Jonas had provided an alibi. He had been traveling. The original team accepted it. No deeper inquiry followed. But now, with the photo showing an anonymous figure outside her cabin, the possibility of unrecorded contact resurfaced. The newly reopened case also authorized the retrieval of the cabin's old floor samples. Modern tools allowed finer detection, revealing faint traces of mineral sediment inconsistent with the cabin's surroundings. This particular sediment appeared naturally near the coordinates found in Aria's notebook scrap. A connection began to form. Ward revisited Aria's handwriting, running his fingers lightly along the ink as though tracing her final intention. She had clearly been charting something: patterns in rock layers, anomalies in formations, structural irregularities. Her research had been progressing toward a conclusion she had yet to present. He studied the pendant again. The geometric symbol engraved on it resembled the diagram she drew repeatedly, a series of intersecting lines forming a subtle, almost imperceptible imbalance. He wondered whether the pendant had been a gift, a marker, or a reminder. By late afternoon, the case board in Ward's office filled with photographs, diagrams, arrows, and notes. Each item brought the narrative closer to shape, yet the central truth remained elusive. He murmured a few fragmented thoughts while adjusting the position of the photo. Not random, something she knew. Figure outside, waiting. Someone aware of her work. The silence in the office felt as deliberate as the silence in the cabin. He then turned to the digital enhancement of the film still. In the background of the silhouette, faint lines indicated the ridge outline. That ridge corresponded exactly to the coordinates on her scrap. It placed the unknown figure near a path leading to a restricted survey zone, an area tied to Aria's research. The reopening now had momentum. Ward filed a formal request to interview Jonas Hale again. The process would take days, but he prepared his notes, examined old statements, and compared them with recent data. Discrepancies appeared. Small ones, subtle, the kind that could be explained easily unless they hid something deeper. The negative from Roll B now lay in a secure evidence case. Ward stared at it through the glass. A tiny frame, a blurred figure, but it was enough to propel everything forward. As snow began drifting outside the precinct windows, Ward felt the case shifting. The quiet truth that had rested beneath decades of unanswered questions was no longer still. Something had started to move. Investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. 1,000 words. Ward spread the original 1998 files across the table in a methodical pattern. The manila folders, aged and slightly warped, emitted the faint scent of old paper and archival dust. He approached them with deliberate calm, as though each sheet carried a hidden pulse waiting to be heard. The first file contained the scene description. He reread every line, noting the phrasing of early observations. No struggle detected, minimal disturbance. Victim found position near interior wall. The wording felt cautious, almost uncertain. He scanned the accompanying photos, comparing angles with the new still frame. The contrast was striking. The original team had focused inward, but the newly discovered frame directed attention outward, toward the doorway, toward the ridge, toward the silhouette. He made a mark. Doorway perspective never examined thoroughly. The second file held witness statements. Several neighbors had been interviewed back then. Most reported nothing unusual, but one, Mrs. Alton, had offered a brief comment now resurfacing with new significance. Thought I saw someone near the cabin earlier that day, not sure, maybe just passing through. At the time, her uncertainty made the detail seem unreliable. Now, paired with the silhouette, it felt essential. Ward adjusted the lighting in his office and read her statement again. The phrasing was hesitant, fragmented, but consistent with someone recalling a fleeting observation. He placed the statement beside the enhanced still. The alignment between her comment and the figure's approximate height and stance created a faint but logical thread. He whispered, "Could be the same person, if she saw them before." He didn't finish the sentence. The third file held Aria's background information: academic records, employment documents, project outlines. As he studied her research notes, he noticed she had been mapping structural stress points in geological formations. Her focus had narrowed sharply in the final weeks. One line in her notebook stood out: inconsistency at marker 3, revisit. The coordinates matched the scrap paper found earlier. Ward circled the line in red. Marker 3 equals key. He next examined the autopsy summary. It had been limited by the tools and procedures available at the time, leaving several variables unresolved. Yet one note captured his attention: trace sediment detected beneath fingernail, unidentified. The sample had been too small to categorize back then, but with new analysis, the mineral composition now linked to the ridge coordinates. He leaned back, processing the convergence of details. Everything points to that ridge. He opened the communications log. Aria had emailed Jonas Hale frequently regarding data anomalies. Their tone had been professional, restrained. The final message she sent had ended abruptly, mid-sentence. Found something unusual at marker. The message timestamp aligned with her trip to the cabin. He underlined it, noting the subtle cutoff. Moving deeper through the files, Ward encountered a detail he had previously skimmed over: a brief note about a university storage room Aria once accessed for archived survey maps. The badge logs showed that on the night before her trip, she entered the room and stayed for 12 minutes. The original team had found nothing unusual inside, but Ward now saw this as potential context. Perhaps she retrieved something. Perhaps she left something behind. He requested the archive logs again and checked recent renovations. The storage room still existed, largely unchanged. He decided to inspect it. Entering the dim space, he inhaled the scent of old documents and metallic cabinets. The room remained quiet except for the faint hum of overhead lights. He scanned the shelves, searching for anomalies. One drawer showed faint scratches near the lock, not new, but older than recent renovations. Inside the drawer were large format maps categorized by decade. He flipped through them until he found a faint pencil mark on one, nearly invisible unless inspected closely. It was located near the ridge area, where Aria had been conducting her surveys. The mark aligned with her notebook sketches. He folded the map carefully, not disturbing the pencil trace, and took it back to his office. The combined evidence suggested she had been on the verge of uncovering something precise, something requiring verification at the ridge. Ward's focus returned to the pendant. The geometric symbol carved into it mirrored the lines on the map, a near-perfect match to the structural diagram she had drawn repeatedly. It was too consistent to ignore. The pendant wasn't decorative, it was referential. His notepad filled with structured thoughts. Penned diagram fragment. Marker 3 equals anomaly. Figure near cabin, possible witness or contact. Coordinates plus mineral traces equals direct link. He arranged the files into a sequence reflecting Aria's final days. Her unusual visit to the archive room, her intensified research focus, her sudden decision to stay at the cabin, and her unfinished message. The narrative formed a logic-based progression, no leaps, no coincidences. The more Ward aligned details, the more he sensed a subtle pattern. Aria had uncovered an inconsistency in data related to her fieldwork. She may have sought clarity at the ridge. Someone else may have known. Someone who visited the cabin, perhaps briefly, perhaps unexpectedly. He looked again at the silhouette. The figure's stance appeared angled slightly inward as though mid-step, possibly entering, possibly leaving. The shape was neither aggressive nor casual, it simply existed, present in the frame at a critical moment. Ward murmured, "Why were you there and why then?" He closed the file slowly. The overlooked yet logical strands of the past were no longer scattered. They were aligning, one by one, with quiet precision. And somewhere in that alignment, the truth waited. The reopened case widened its perimeter when Ward began reconstructing the timeline of individuals linked, directly or indirectly, to Aria's final research period. What emerged was a quiet network of connections, each thread thin but present, each person carrying reasons, subtle, human, logical, to intersect with her path. None were overt, none suspicious at first glance, yet all merited examination. The first was, naturally, Jonas Hale, Aria's colleague. Archival records showed extensive communication between them, though the tone had grown increasingly formal near the end. He had submitted his original alibi, traveled to another state for a conference. Airline records confirmed the trip, but Ward noticed the dates carried a small gap, one evening unaccounted for due to a booking change. Back then, this gap had seemed harmless. Now, with the newly discovered photo still revealing a figure near the cabin, the gap carried renewed weight. Jonas's motive, if any, would rest on research. Perhaps a conflict about findings, perhaps concern, perhaps something else entirely. His alibi was not broken, only imperfect. The second potential suspect arose through Aria's archived emails. Dr. Miriam Voss, a senior researcher who supervised part of Aria's project. The emails revealed respectful communication, yet a few lines hinted at disagreement regarding data interpretation. Nothing confrontational, just differing academic views. But Aria had written in her notebook, "Recheck V statement." It was not clear why. Voss had also visited the ridge several times that season, logged by permits required for environmental work. Her motive, if one existed, would be grounded in professional tension, two interpretations of the same charted anomaly. She had reported being home on the night in question. No witness confirmed it. She simply never left her residence, according to her own statement. That alone placed her within the radius of possibility. The third individual emerged from a neighbor statement in the original file, Carter Elling, a seasonal contractor who occasionally maintained cabins in the area. He had been the one who noticed the temporary disorder outside the cabin days after the event, a detail he had mentioned quickly, then withdrawn, unsure whether it mattered. Ward revisited him. Carter appeared cautious, thoughtful, his answers measured. He had been working on nearby property that week, which placed him physically close. His motive, however, appeared non-existent. Still, Ward noted his proximity. Presence alone required review. The fourth was the person rarely considered, Aria's longtime friend, Lissa Green. She had been the last to speak with Aria by phone before the trip, recalling a soft unease in her voice. Lissa had mentioned the phrase, "Something doesn't add up." Originally, this had been logged as emotional speculation, but now Ward saw it as potential insight. Lissa had remained in the city during the event, with multiple witnesses confirming her location. Her motive seemed minimal. Yet the emotional closeness placed her within a sphere of relevance, not as a likely suspect, but as someone whose interpretation of Aria's state of mind could influence the narrative. The fifth emerged unexpectedly. While reviewing old geological permit logs, Ward found entries signed by Professor Emeritus Rowan Hale, Jonas's relative. Rowan had once collaborated on ridge-related studies decades prior, and had since retired. The coincidence of the surname prompted Ward to look deeper. Rowan had visited the ridge area earlier that year for personal documentation of outdated field maps. His statement in 1998 was brief and unevaluated. The original team never saw him as relevant. Yet his historical connection to similar research and his proximity to the region during Aria's trip placed him within the investigative radius. One by one, Ward charted motives, opportunities, and inconsistencies. Jonas, academic tension, gap in alibi. Dr. Voss, disagreement in data interpretation, unverified solitude. Carter, physical presence near site, uncertain observations. Lissa, emotional closeness, final conversation insights. Rowan, historical connection to ridge anomalies, regional proximity. None appeared threatening. None suggested intent. But the case required logic, not assumption. Each detail mattered because Aria's work had drawn her toward something specific, and someone else may have followed. Ward filled a whiteboard with alternating colors. Blue for alibis, gray for motive indicators, black for timeline overlaps. As he added each name, the board took on a pattern that felt both intricate and incomplete. A structure shaped by possibility, not conclusion. He continued cross-referencing statements with digital enhancements of the still frame. The figure's silhouette was tall, posture slightly forward. Jonas fit the general height. Carter as well. Rowan, perhaps. Voss was shorter. None of this was definitive, just geometry and estimation. Ward reviewed the travel logs again. Jonas had purchased a ticket adjustment on the evening before the event. The reason was not specified. He marked it. He then returned to the old geological permits. Rowan's signature reappeared near a restricted survey zone, the same area corresponding to Aria's coordinates. He marked that too. He read through Voss's academic exchanges, noting her emphasis on structural anomalies. Her wording echoed Aria's phrasing. Another mark. Slowly, logically, carefully, the network of suspects solidified. Ward exhaled softly, a controlled, steady release, and looked at the board. The cabin, the ridge, the university, the archival room, the coordinates, the silhouette, all connected the suspects not through emotion, but through proximity to Aria's research. He assembled the suspect summary in fragmented whispers, the way investigators sometimes speak when aligning mental threads. Motives subtle, not personal. Opportunity overlaps, each one part of the ring. Which one acted and why? The unanswered questions pulsed in the quiet of the room. Ward knew the truth would not come from force or assumption. It would emerge from the smallest, most precise detail, hiding in the intersection between research, presence, and timing. And he was getting closer. Clues emerged slowly. linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. 1,000 words. The clues began to surface not in grand discoveries, but in quiet shifts of context, slight variations in tone, timing, and placement. Ward knew that most cases did not hinge on dramatic evidence but on subtle alignment. And here, subtlety was everywhere. He started with Aria's notebook, revisiting the repeated sketches of the geometric pattern. The lines were drawn lightly but consistently, each variation slightly tighter than the last. It suggested focus, not artistic intention, but analysis. She had been trying to understand something structural. Ward noticed that one of the sketches included a faint arrow pointing outward, toward the edge of the page, as though meant to guide her next step. He paired this with the map from the storage room. The pencil mark, nearly invisible, matched the angle of the arrow. It formed a continuous route from marker 1 to marker 3, tracing the ridge's structural balance. The inconsistency she wrote about suddenly matched the sediment findings. The cabin was not incidental. It sat near the line of alignment. She may have been analyzing how natural formations shifted over time. The emotional conflict emerged indirectly. In an archived message between Aria and Jonas, the line, "Your interpretation differs from mine, but we'll resolve this soon," stood out. The tone was calm, but Ward sensed underlying tension. Not confrontation, just uncertainty. Jonas's reply had been short, acknowledging the message without adding clarity. Ward compared these messages to Lissa's account of their final call. Aria had sounded thoughtful, almost contemplative. Lissa recalled her saying she planned to check something one more time. The phrase matched the note in her notebook. Revisit marker 3. Aria had been on the edge of confirming something, a conclusion, a correction, an oversight somewhere in the data. The emotional link surfaced again in Dr. Voss's archived memos. Voss had emphasized that precise alignment in the ridge studies was crucial for future mapping. She had praised Aria's diligence repeatedly, yet one comment in particular lingered. Ensure no data section is misinterpreted. Small errors ripple outward. The phrasing implied caution, perhaps pressure, perhaps a reminder grounded in professional stakes. Ward compiled these threads, searching for consistency. Meanwhile, the silhouette in the still frame acted as the silent core. No expression, no gesture, just a presence. It linked the cabin with the ridge and with Aria's last known movements. Someone had been near her at the moment the frame was captured. Someone she likely knew, based on the absence of struggle. Someone possibly connected to her research. Ward pulled the enhanced still closer, tracing the faint outline of the figure's stance. Slight tilt, shoulders angled, a position consistent with someone turning toward the cabin. The height estimate narrowed the suspect list. He turned to Jonas's travel gap, a booking adjustment that shifted his arrival by several hours. The airline timestamp showed an unaccounted window, long enough to visit the cabin, but no confirmation tied him to the state at that moment. He repeated the process with Voss's timeline. She had no verifiable witness, only her own account of staying home. Her permit history placed her near the ridge weeks prior, but not on the date in question. He evaluated Rowan. His field notes included references to outdated ridge maps, but nothing current. His presence in Utah that year was documented, yet the timing around Aria's trip lacked detail. Each clue served dual purpose, a reason to suspect and a reason not to. Ward then looked at Carter's maintenance schedule. He had been working on a distant cabin but acknowledged walking near Aria's rental earlier in the week. He had seen tire marks in the dirt he couldn't identify. That note had been originally dismissed. Now, Ward marked it as relevant. Tire marks meant someone had arrived unexpectedly. Perhaps the silhouette. The emotional conflict among the suspects became an underlying pattern. Jonah's professional uncertainty. Voss pressure and research integrity. Rowan protective attachment to historical work. Carter confusion between observation and assumption. Lissa concern for a friend nearing a breakthrough. None had outwardly expressed conflict, but internally, these understated tensions intersected with Aria's trajectory. Ward gathered the clues into a chronological reconstruction. Aria reviewed ridge data right arrow, found inconsistency right arrow, visited archive right arrow left city, arrived at cabin right arrow revisited marker 3, took still frame right arrow silhouette appears right arrow silence follows. He whispered to himself. Everything ties to the ridge and someone meeting her there. He pressed the still frame beside the map. The figure's outline overlapped the line marking the ridge path. It was not proof, but it was direction. Ward felt the case sharpening. The emotional conflicts were not confrontational but motivational. Differences in interpretation, protectiveness over work, desire to maintain stability, a need for clarity, human, not dramatic. These subtle tensions intertwined with the inconsistencies, and somewhere in that interaction, the catalyst awaited. The clues were no longer scattered. They were guiding him, slowly, cautiously, toward the truth. Unexpected twist reveals the least suspected person as killer. Tilde 500 words for balance. The twist emerged not from dramatic revelation, but from a small recalculation, a shift in logic that redirected the entire case. Ward re-examined the archive room logs one last time. The timestamp of Aria's visit showed 12 minutes, yet her notes suggested she retrieved a map. 12 minutes was too long for a simple retrieval. He felt something stir in the logic and pulled the logs for others who accessed the room that week. There it was. Rowan Hale, the retired professor, had accessed the archive room 2 days before Aria. His name had been flagged previously as incidental, but now the overlap mattered. Rowan had used his outdated credentials, a detail the original team missed because the system had not flagged inactive profiles in 1998. Ward dug deeper. Rowan's archived studies involved the same ridge zone Aria was analyzing. His reports contained a structural conclusion Aria's new findings contradicted. Her corrections would have revised part of his published work he had taken pride in for decades. Ward felt a slow tightening in his chest, not emotional distress, but recognition of logical alignment. He placed the pendant under bright light. The geometric symbol matched a diagram Rowan had once used in a lecture 20 years earlier, found in an old university pamphlet. Aria may have received it from him during research mentorship. She had carried it with her as reference, not sentiment. The twist followed naturally. Rowan had visited the archive room, seen her retrievals, recognized her line of inquiry, and realized her findings challenged his legacy. Not in a dramatic way, simply through correction. A correction he could not accept. Ward returned to the still frame. The silhouette's posture slightly forward, shoulders angled, aligned more closely with Rowan's manner of standing, observed in photograph archives. Taller than Voss, narrower shoulders than Jonah's, a posture shaped by age, not youth. Then the mineral traces. Rowan had a habit of conducting field checks even after retirement. His presence near the ridge earlier that season explained the sediment under Aria's fingernail, not from conflict, but from shared terrain. The timeline connected cleanly. Rowan accessed archive right arrow, noticed contradiction right arrow, followed Aria's trip, quietly right arrow, appeared at cabin doorway, as still frame captured right arrow final outcome followed. He had been the least suspected due to his age, retirement, and distance from current studies. But the logic, once aligned, was steady. Ward exhaled, the realization spreading across his mind with quiet clarity. The truth had been waiting behind the smallest detail, the overlooked archive log. The case reached its final phase not with sudden intensity, but with a steady, methodical quiet. Ward sat in his office, surrounded by the assembled timeline, the enhanced still frame, the archive logs, the sediment report, and the map Aria had traced before her final movement toward the ridge. Each document rested in its designated place, forming a structured narrative that no longer wavered. The logic was intact, the conclusion complete. Yet the room felt heavy, as though the truth carried weight beyond the confines of paper and evidence. He reviewed the path one last time. A retired professor, once admired, had unknowingly shaped the investigation by slipping through the periphery of relevance. His signature on old geological permits, his access to the archive room using outdated credentials, his long-standing attachment to structural models that Aria's findings subtly questioned, his presence near the ridge, recorded in environmental logs documenting personal visits. In 1998, these details seemed unimportant, harmless, scattered, disconnected. Only now did their alignment reveal clarity. Ward leaned back and closed his eyes briefly, letting the soft hum of the overhead lights settle into the room. The process had been quiet, almost contemplative. No dramatic break-ins, no confessions, no sudden outbursts. Just logic, slow, persistent, unwavering. The kind of investigation that honored the silence of the past rather than overpowering it. He opened his eyes again and looked at Aria's notebook. Its pages held the last record of her careful observations, her corrections, her steady approach toward understanding the ridge's structural inconsistencies. She had been focused, dedicated, methodical. Her notes never hinted at fear or suspicion. She likely believed she was alone in her work, untouched by outside interference. She had stepped into the cabin with the intention of returning to her data, not knowing someone else had drawn a parallel path to her findings. Ward traced a line across the final page, following the small arrow she had drawn toward the edge. It pointed toward marker 3, the anomaly she intended to revisit. In her notes, she had written only the word confirm. A simple instruction, a scientist's clarity. There had been no anticipation of conflict, just work. He allowed the silence of the office to take shape again. The still frame lay in its protective sleeve, the silhouette frozen at the threshold of the cabin. That blurred figure, ambiguous and harmless at first glance, had become the anchor for the conclusion. A quiet presence, a moment caught by accident, revealing more through posture than clarity. Rowan Hale had not intended to be captured. He had not expected Aria to photograph anything at all. Yet the frame was the one trace he left behind, small, blurry, but enough. Ward whispered to himself, barely audible, truth was here all along, just faint. He turned to the sediment analysis, the mineral traces recovered from both the ridge and the cabin floor. The match had been subtle, requiring modern tools that did not exist when Aria's file was first created. A quiet link, small yet decisive. Evidence that Rowan had walked the same terrain Aria studied, the same anomaly she defined. They had been on converging paths long before their encounter at the cabin. Ward then shifted his attention to the archive logs. The outdated credential Rowan used had remained active in the system due to an administrative oversight unnoticed, untouched. This single oversight allowed his name to blend into background noise. In 1998, the timestamp looked ordinary. A retired professor retrieving old maps. Nothing more. Only in the context of Aria's 12-minute visit did it reveal significance. She had entered to verify something. Rowan had entered to confirm what she verified. Two lines of inquiry intersecting in silence. Ward took a slow breath and exhaled. The truth had not been concealed through elaborate means. It had simply rested behind assumptions. The assumption that a retired academic posed no relevance, that archived maps carried no risk, that a quiet silhouette had no meaning. The surface had obscured depth. The familiarity of Rowan's name had softened suspicion. His decades of service had shielded him from scrutiny. Logic, once aligned, revealed that the least suspected person was the only one who fit every detail. He rose from his chair and approached the window. Snow drifted lightly across the parking lot, settling in thin layers. The world outside felt muted, as though echoing the quiet resolution inside. There was no triumph in the conclusion, no sense of victory. Just clarity, a calm, unornamented truth. In the official report draft, Ward noted the sequence in disciplined language. Archive access overlap indicates prior knowledge of victims' findings. Ridge permit history confirms presence near structural anomaly. Mineral trace match substantiates terrain overlap. Still frame silhouette aligns with physical characteristics. Motive inferred through preservation of prior work. He paused after writing the final line. The motive was not dramatic, not rooted in intent to harm, but in preservation, pride, and an inability to accept correction. A quiet conflict, academic in nature, unfolding across maps and diagrams instead of arguments. Aria's work had touched a fragile part of Rowan's legacy. She might never have realized it. He signed the preliminary summary and placed it in the outgoing evidence queue. The mechanical aspect of the process felt almost too straightforward. Years of uncertainty distilled into structured paragraphs. The precision of justice applied in measured steps. Ward looked once more at Aria's pendant. The geometric symbol, closely matching Rowan's old lecture diagrams, reflected the nature of her work, lines intersecting logically, quietly revealing the truth. The pendant rested between his fingers with surprising lightness. He wondered whether she wore it as reference or memory, perhaps both. He placed it back into its evidence container and sealed it. The official case closure would require final review, but the investigative portion was complete. Ward knew the facts were solid. The conclusion was supported. Yet the emotional layer lingered, subtle and unresolved. Even as logic delivered answers, it could not erase the quiet humanity of the story. A researcher seeking clarity, a retired academic guarding history, an investigator returning to a forgotten cabin where dust remembered more than people did. He gathered the files slowly, stacking them with the care they deserved. Each sheet had shaped the story. Each detail, once overlooked, had contributed to the final arc. The desk cleared, leaving only the still frame beside the lamp. He stared at it for a long moment. The silhouette remained blurred, indistinct. Even now, with the full truth known, the figure looked like a ghost drifting through the doorway, neither threatening nor calm, simply present. Ward found himself wondering whether the image would feel different had the details been sharper. Perhaps its lack of clarity was part of its weight, a reminder that truth rarely arrives in perfect form. He whispered, barely above breath, "Clarity doesn't erase the quiet." As he prepared the final report, a soft recollection surfaced, Aria's family waiting during the initial investigation, the hope in their eyes tempered by patience. They had wanted closure, not answers of grandeur, just clarity. The kind of clarity time often withholds. Ward thought about how they might respond now, years later, hearing a truth shaped by logic and small details rather than dramatic revelations. A truth that might bring calm, yet still carry the echo of something lost. He looked again at the board where the case once sprawled in colors and arrows. Now it was empty, wiped clean, order restored. But the emptiness carried a presence, the quiet awareness that solving a case does not heal it, it only explains it. He sat once more and folded his hands, letting his mind settle into the investigative stillness he had carried throughout the process. The cabin re-entered his thoughts, the way dust layered the old wooden floor, the faint mark in the corner, the way the curtain moved with winter air. The room had not resisted truth. It had simply waited for someone willing to see. Ward understood that investigations rarely end with emotional resolution. They end with structured truth, documented and submitted. Yet something human remains beyond the paperwork. A quiet space where reasoning meets reflection, where evidence meets memory, where closure meets the feeling that closure is never fully complete. He wrote the final line of his report. Conclusion reached through sequence of logical alignment. Underlying truth existed beyond immediate surface. He set down his pen gently. The room felt still, balanced, yet faintly unsettled, as though acknowledging that truth, even when uncovered, retains its own quiet weight. Ward turned off the lamp. The office dimmed. The still frame caught the last sliver of light before falling into shadow. The world settled into silence once more. And the truth, clear, quiet, and human, remained.